What's up, I'm not gonna do that. Today, I'm gonna be doing a tier list of all the encounters in Generation 5, because that's all I play. I'm gonna be doing a tier list for specifically a base Nuzlocke of Pokemon Black and White, though whatever I say in this list will probably be about the same for the Pokemon in Black and White too. I'll start by saying that this is just my preference, this is just my opinion, and everything in this tier list is based off of my experiences. So if you do like this video and you want to see more Nuzlocke content, then go subscribe down below because that's all I play. Couple things to mention. This is going to be going over a hardcore Nuzlocke setting, which I think it's the majority of you guys. So no healing items, set mode, and level cap all the way through. Also, we're not going to go over Pokemon from the Dream World. It's a confusing mechanic that 10-year-old me could never figure out. 10 years later, I still refuse to figure out, so we're just not going to go over them. That's just a me problem. Okay, so we're going to start in F tier and move up to S tier. So in F tier are Pokemon that, honestly, you might want to actively avoid. They're bad, they have poor stats, or they have bad move pools, or all of the above. Starting in F tier are a couple of Pokemon: Hydreigon, Bisharp, Volcarona, Mandibuzz, and Braviary. These are all in F tier because if you're playing a base Nuzlocke of Black and White with level caps, then you're just never going to get them. And if you're only limited to their pre-evolutions, then they're just definitely F tier. The first actual Pokemon in F tier is Heatmor. Half of you won't know what this Pokemon is, and the other half of you will forgot that this Pokemon actually existed. And for the 6 of you that do know what this Pokemon is, you're probably going to agree with me that this is the worst Pokemon in the game. You just get it way too late, and it has literally 0 uses for the part of the game that you do have access to it, which is just the Elite Four. It's super slow, it's super frail, and its moveset is garbage. It's definitely, by far, the worst Pokemon in the game. Also in the bottom of F tier is Vanillux. Now you might be thinking, well, Vanillux is actually a good Pokemon, right? It's an Ice type, it's good against Drayden. But the thing is that it evolves really late, so you're actually stuck with a Vanillish until the Elite Four, in which it's not even good for that, so it's in a very similar category as Heatmor. The third worst Pokemon in the game is Cryogonal. Again, it's a very similar Pokemon to Heatmor. You get it really late, which is right before Gym 7, and the only thing it's good for is the Gym 8 trainers in Drayden. The thing is, even in Drayden, if you don't one-shot the opponents, then your Cryogonal dies instantly because it literally has the lowest defense in the game. At the very least, it is kind of fast and it's kind of bulky on the special side, so you might get some use out of it, but the low defense is just way too much of a reliability to use reliably. The last Pokemon in F tier is Garbodor. It's the only pure poison type in the game. Poison types really just don't do much in Unova, and of all the things that it can do, it gets easily outclassed by fire, flying, or bug Pokemon. And half the time, it has a really bad ability in Weak Armor, which lowers defense but increases speed upon getting hit. It's a Pokemon with only average base stat totals, bad abilities, and very bad movesets, so I just find myself just never using it, taking it off whenever I have it. So that's all the Pokemon in F tier. We're gonna move on to C tier now. These Pokemon, they have some uses in the game, but they're probably going to sit in the box once you realize how much they are outclassed. They generally have either poor stats or typing, or it's crippled by a bad ability or other major weaknesses. So at the bottom of C tier, we have Swoobat. Swoobat's a Pokemon that's very, very available, so you're most likely going to find it, but you're almost guaranteed to immediately bench it for a better Pokemon. You do face one in the game against Skyla, and you might initially be scared of a non-item acrobatics, but then you're going to see that it does no damage. It's honestly both the worst Psychic and Flying type in this game. It's too frail, and it just cannot deal enough damage with its 77 special attack stat. Next in C tier is Druddigon. Druddigon's a Pokemon that you get, again, very late in the game, and it doesn't really do anything. It's decently bulky, and half the time it does get Sheer Force, which means that you can do massive damage, but it's not particularly good in any fight. It's not even that good for Drayden because almost all the time you're going to be slower than the opponents, which means you can't really risk not killing your opponents. It doesn't really have a niche. You really don't have a reason to use it. Similar to Druddigon actually is the next Pokemon, Bouffalant, another Pokemon that you get like really late, so it's right before Victory Road, doesn't really do anything for the rest of the game. You'll notice that a lot of Pokemon that you get later in the game tend to be lower because if you're already at that stage of the game, and you get this late encounter, the chances of you boosting your win rate is not going to increase that much more. So Bouffalant would fit in this category, same as Druddigon. It's bulky, it's offensive, it's slow. It does get Reckless, which helps you dish out damage, similar to Sheer Force, but realistically, you're not going to use this Pokemon. Next, I have the worst water type in the game, Basculin. In the general scheme of all Nuzlockes, water types are stable, they're bulky, and they're consistent. And they also get access to Surf, which is arguably the best water type move in the game. So, when you get a frail physical attacker in Basculin, you're going to be very, very disappointed. It does get adaptability, which does boost its water move. I find that water Pokemon don't really have a niche in Unova unless it's specifically on a route that's raining, which it's not always and it's not guaranteed. And something I've noticed, everything that a water type can do, there's probably another water type or even a grass type Pokemon that can do that same job, but better. Speaking of which, now we have Sawsbuck. In my eyes, Sawsbuck had the potential to be very good, but it just got shafted by a bad moveset and the added normal typing. The added normal typing, it just does nothing for it. It does give it a ghost immunity, but what are you gonna do against the ghost type? Its moveset does not help it at all. Offensively, it only gets normal moves and grass moves, and the best it's got is Horn Leech, which is just a physical Giga Drain, but that's just not good enough to cut it. Now we're in the middle of C tier, we have Liepard. So I personally love using Liepard. It gets Prankster, and it's got a really fun moveset to play with. Taunt, Fake Out, Swagger, Thunder Wave. It's very fun to play with, but it's not nearly consistent enough. It's too frail, so it can only really get off one attack before you gotta switch out. Having Prankster guarantees that you will get off a hit, but on a really fast Pokemon like Liepard, it's almost like a wasted ability because there's not many Pokemon faster than Liepard. Next on the list, we have the evolution of Luvdisc. I think Alomomola was like a gimmicky concept that just went wrong. I think they just tried to give it the stats of a Wobbuffet and the seduction of like Kylie Jenner, but then they just bombed its stats. It has 40 special attack stat, which is one of the lowest in the game. It's just so bad that it's so obviously low tier, but for some reason it gets Calm Mind and some good moves like Shadow Ball, Ice Beam, and Psychic. Kind of puts it up a little to middle of C tier, but it's still not that good. Next on the list is your early rat Pokemon, Watchog. You get him super early alongside another early normal type, and Watchog is so much worse than this other one. Its stats are worse, its ability is worse, and every time I get it, I just think, damn, I could have gotten the other one, which, spoiler alert, is better. Which is not really a spoiler because I haven't said its name yet, because that's how a bottom-up tier list works. The best Pokemon in C tier is Stunfisk. So, Stunfisk, like Bouffalant and Druddigon, it's another slow late-game Pokemon. It's got worse offenses, but the ground electric typing is kinda useful in Unova, so it is slightly higher than those other two. B tier. Okay, so B tier are Pokemon that are solid enough. You're probably going to be swapping them in and out to fit the situation. They can be kind of useful with like either typing, stats, or move pool, but they might be lacking in some area or just be outclassed by a better Pokemon. They could be useful despite having a couple flaws. So the first and worst in B tier is Chinchino. This is definitely a Pokemon that makes you say, oh come on, a Chinchino? Then you realize, oh wait, it's got Stab Return, it's kind of fast, okay. It's got Charm, that's kind of useful. And then you realize that this thing does no damage. And it's really, really, really frail. It does have an okay ability in Technician, but not enough moves to capitalize on it. Next up, I put Unpheasant. So Unpheasant is a disappointment. It gets the moves that it needs to fill the niche that it does. Think Fly, Return, U-Turn, as well as some utility moves like Roost, Tailwind, Feather Dance, and Taunt, but its stats are just so sad. It's slow for a flying type Pokemon, it's not that offensive, and its defenses are just so low. But it gets the job done, which does put it in B tier. Next up, I have Behem. So I have mixed feelings about Behem. I've used it not a lot, but a couple times. What I think about it is very polarizing. So offensively, unless you want to exactly use it for its psychic attacks, you're probably not going to be using this thing. But it's got a bunch of cool moves like heal block, simple beam, screens. It's just not defensive enough to tank hits, and it's way too slow. Literally the next Pokemon on this list, it's very similar to Behem in it's Musharna. Again, it's slow, only good for psychic attacks, but it's bulkier than Behem. The only difference between, or at least the only major difference, is that you get it earlier, but it's not that much better than Behem. Next up is our best Ice-type Pokemon. Unova has 3 Ice-type lines, and Beartic is the best of them. Ice-types just don't have a role in Unova. They don't do anything in Unova, except for exactly countering Drayden. Once you do that, you can just get rid of them. Beartic is a sad Pokemon to look at because it has great stats, it's decently bulky, but the fact that it is an Ice type and it's slow means that it can only take a hit, deal some damage, and then it's done. It doesn't have enough attacking options, and it's got way too many weaknesses in Unova. The next Pokemon is Crustle, the worst defensive specialist on this list. What prevents it from being higher up on this list is a lack of attack stat and coverage. It does get Shell Smash, but such an offensive moveset on such a slow defensive Pokemon is kind of a waste. Its abilities do help it get off these Shell Smashes, so think Sturdy and Shell Armor, but it's still just an average Pokemon. Next on this list, I have the 3 Elemental Monkeys. I've used them before, and I really want to put them higher on the list. I love to use them because they're fast, offensive. Despite being stone evolutions, their move pool, I guess through TMs, is actually kind of good. The problem is that they don't deal enough damage consistently because they're just too frail to be reliable. That's probably the most major flaw you'll find about them, but it's so prevalent because you'll notice that it just cannot take hits, so you can't stay in and deal damage. Next on this list is Whimsicott. For the longest time, right, grass types were slow, they don't deal a lot of damage, and for some reason, Unova decided to take that idea and chuck it out the window and make all the grass types fast and offensive. Unfortunately, Whimsicott did get shafted on the offensive side and just stuck with the traditional low attack but lots of utility moves, but then just without the bulk. So it really can't do much. It does have Prankster, but again, it's already a really fast Pokemon, so it's basically useless. Here we have Emolga, another fast and frail Pokemon. You do get uses out of Emolga since you get it right before Skyla. You have access to Volt Switch, Encore, Thunder Wave, which makes it instantly better than all other Pokemon that only do well for like one situation. Oh my god, the lack of frailty on this thing is such a disappointment. You can't even switch it in on anything. You have to start with Emolga and then switch it out because if it takes a hit, you're almost guaranteed to die. B tier is pretty big, so we're still in the bottom half, but here's an interesting one, Reuniclus. I'm not sure why I put Reuniclus slightly higher, or I guess like a bit higher than Behem and Musharna, even though they function exactly the same. I think it's just for the fact that Reuniclus is a bit more consistent. It gets Magic Guard, which means that you can pre-burn yourself. Again, it's good for psychic attacks only. Reuniclus is probably the bulkiest out of the 3. But again, you can get Screens, Imprison, and a bunch of other funky moves. Next up, we have Audino. So Audino is a weird Pokemon in my mind. On paper, it's set up to be a all bulk, no offensive Pokemon, especially with Regenerator as an ability. This makes Audino incredible as a doubles Pokemon, but there's just not enough double battles in Black and White. But the fact that you can get a semi-high base stat Pokemon so early on in the game puts it in B tier. Next on this list is Maractus. Okay, so Maractus is probably the most average Pokemon in the game. I literally wrote that. It's got okay stats, okay ability. Water Absorb is good, but then its defenses are low, so that kind of averages out. I honestly don't have much to say about this Pokemon because I don't really use it that often. I've only used it once for Nuzlocke. It's good early game, but then it gets outclassed once you get past Berg by other Pokemon that just do its job better. I remember when I first played Black and White when I was like 10 or 11, I traded my Oshawott for my neighbor's Maractus, and I was like, oh, what? Your Maractus is so high leveled, and it's such a big Pokemon. It must be good, right? It actually carried for a good portion of the game, but then once I got past Clay, I realized, yeah, okay, this thing sucks. Now we're getting to the middle of B tier. So we're starting here with Mian Xiao. Mian Xiao has a lot going for it. Good move pool, U-turn, fake out, drain punch, high jump kick, acrobatics. Incredibly good ability in regenerator, which pairs up really nicely with U-turn. You just get it a little bit too late in the game, so it doesn't really provide much for the part of the game that you do have it, but the fact that it is a good Pokemon just does bump it up a little bit. After Mian Xiao, we have Gothitelle. So you might have noticed that all the psychic types are ranked super low on this tier list. This is because all the psychic type builds in this game are just the same. Decent coverage, good special defense, but then bad physical defense, but the same problems still stand. The problem with psychic types in general in Unova is that they have a very small role to play, and the role that they do play easily overlaps with other Pokemon. Yeah, there is one exception to this psychic dilemma that I will get to later on. Now we're getting to the top half of B tier. We're starting with Cofagrigus. On paper, Cofagrigus is a really good Pokemon. Pure ghost type, lots of status moves, lots of utility, incredible defense. I just cannot put it any higher because, oh my god, it's slow as frick. This Pokemon might be better in the hands of some better players, but I just cannot seem to use this Pokemon reliably. It is still a ghost type, and it does okay for the Elite Four, so it does get to the top half of B tier, but I just can't find myself putting it any higher. Right in front of Cofagrigus is Excelgor, which is the opposite of Cofagrigus. It's fast and it's tissue paper. Still, it has utility, it has status moves, but I can't find myself using this thing consistently because I just can't rely on it. It's too frail. The only reason it's higher than Cofagrigus is because my playstyle is more on the aggressive side, which prefers obviously aggressive Pokemon, which means I would prefer an Excelgor over Cofagrigus, but they're both equally shit in my hands. Okay, Lilligant. Lilligant is weird. It can only do its job as a grass type, and it does it very well. It's a reliable Pokemon. It's very you get what you see. It gets Quiver Dance, Petal Dance, Synthesis, Leech Seed, and you're sweeping. It's a pretty self-explanatory Pokemon. Now we have Swanna. So if you don't obtain the best flying type Pokemon in the game, then you're gonna default to Swanna. It's a decent flying type Pokemon. The thing with Swanna is that its attack is not high enough to rely on it consistently. It works better as a water type Pokemon, honestly. It's also a good Pokemon to set up with. You get Feather Dance, you can set up Tailwind, Roost, U-turn out. It's not good on paper, but I see myself using it pretty often, so I do want to put it higher up on this list. Next up, we have Durant. Durant is one of these Pokemon that you get really late in the game. Victory Road, similar to Heatmore. But the thing about Durant that it has over Heatmore is that it does really well in the Elite Four, not for its Steel typing, but for its Bug typing. Though obviously having the Steel type does help it a lot. 50% of the time, you will get Hustle, which trades accuracy for power. On paper, usually sounds fair. You can no longer rely on it consistently, or at least I don't. But if you get a Swarm Durant, then you're basically set for the Elite Four. Honestly, if Durant didn't have the chance of getting Hustle, it would probably be in at least mid to high A tier. Okay, so we're nearing the top of B tier. This is top 5 now. We have a better fighting type Pokemon in Conkeldurr. So I'm gonna be doing this tier list as if you do have trade evolutions available to you. You noticed Excelgor. In all honesty, Conkeldurr is not that great until you get it until it's like a girder. Similar to Mian Xiao, it doesn't really help you that much for the portion that you do have it. Fighting types in this game don't really seem to have like a niche or a role to play, though it is nice to have a bulky Pokemon just to switch into. Next on this list is another electric type Pokemon, Zebstrika. I used to think Zebstrika sucked, but now that I look at it, it's better than average, slightly better than average. It's fast, its bulk is passable, and offensively it's decent. It's probably the most consistent electric type Pokemon. It's bulky enough and offensive enough to get you through most of the situations that you need it. I'm pretty sure you get Zebstrika much more often. You're just gonna have a higher chance of running into it, which means you're gonna be forced to use one. Top 3 in B tier. We're gonna start with Scolipede. Scolipede is a Pokemon I wanted to put in A tier. Looking at its typing, its moveset, its stats, it looks like an A tier Pokemon. The problem is that it doesn't perform like an A tier Pokemon. What's most debilitating about it is its relatively low offensive stat. You pair that with a bad move pool, it gets Mega Horn, but then that's about it. It disappoints you when you really need it. It does get Agility Baton Pass, so it can be used as a setup Pokemon, but it's not a bulky Pokemon, so if you're using Scolipede as a setup Pokemon, then you gotta think about what you're doing wrong. Second best Pokemon in B tier is Amoonguss. What's good about Amoonguss is that it's a pretty good grass type Pokemon that you get guaranteed. It's quite bulky and it has okay-ish attack, but its real qualities come from utility moves like Clear Smog and Spore, especially Spore. You can delay Foongus' evolution until 50, which is the Elite Four's level cap, to guarantee that you get Spore. Grass types, honestly, I've noticed tend to do better in Unova than other regions, since it lacks good Pokemon that are good against grass types. At the top of B tier, best Pokemon in B tier, this is probably a hot take, but I put Zoroark here. I actually don't think Zoroark is that useful to your Nuzlocke. I used to think this Pokemon was just S+ tier for its illusion ability, but then the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that you don't really run into psychic type Pokemon that often, or at least good psychic type Pokemon, which means that you won't be able to use Zoroark's ability to its fullest potential. It performs very averagely over the course of the run and only pops off for the Elite Four, which is, it's too late to make a big difference in the game. Plus, it's a lot of work. You gotta get yourself the legendary dogs, you gotta catch them in Soul Silver. At that point, you gotta think to yourself, is it really worth it? Although, in Black White 2, where it's guaranteed to be given to you, I think Zoroark is S+, honestly. So that just about wraps up B tier, and now we're gonna move on to A tier. So these are Pokemon that are, these are like the definition of like a good Pokemon. They're not going to be useful in every single battle, but they're definitely good Pokemon that you would more than likely have on your team. And they can provide a good offensive or defensive presence on your team. Starting at the bottom, I have Electros. So I actually don't like Electros. I want to put it down in like C tier because it just looks bad. But then it's also like not that promising. It's electric type with Levitate, which means it has no weaknesses. It's got a good TM move pool and it's got good offensive stats. The one thing it's missing is speed. Without speed, Electros just gets two-shot by any neutral attack if you switch it in. So it's set up to be a Pokemon that needs to be in and like kill off the rip, but not having the speed to do so kind of cripples its potential. Still, I put it in A tier because obviously it doesn't have a weakness, and then you can probably just Volt Switch out for some chip. That's mainly how I've used my Electros, and the fact that an Electros with so much potential has just been reduced to a Pokemon that I just switch into ground moves and chip to break sturdy is kind of just sad. Second worst Pokemon in A tier, I have Serperior. So when I first started this tier list, I put all starters at least top of A tier. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Serperior kind of gets outclassed by another grass type in the game. Problem with Serperior is just that it doesn't do any damage. It's only got 75 in both attack stats. It does get Coil and Leaf Blade, but Serperior acts more like a defensive grass Pokemon than an offensive one. And even then, it gets outclassed by another grass type. Basically, what you want your Serperior to do, there's a better grass type Pokemon that does its job better. Next up on this list, I have a pair of Pokemon, Sock and Throw. I know what you're thinking. How can they be placed so high when other bulkier Pokemon, like Conkeldurr, or faster aggressive Pokemon, like Minshao, exist? The reason is that you get them for Lenora. Lenora is your biggest run killer. Having access to fully evolved fighting type Pokemon by Lenora is a huge asset. They're decent Pokemon. They're both pretty bulky since Sock has sturdy, which means that you can usually get off a bulk up and then go to town. They probably eventually will be outclassed by Conk or Minshao, but the fact that they provide so much value against Lenora from early to even honestly like mid to late game means that they deserve to be higher. So that's why they're in A tier. So after Throw and Sock, I have Escavalier. Only used Escavalier once in like a personal Nuzlocke of mine like a couple years ago. It's a good Pokemon. It's got good bulk, great offensives, good move pool, does well in the Elite Four. You get it kind of late, but it is useful for the game that you do have it for. The one thing that really holds it back is its lack of speed. I literally think it's the slowest Pokemon in the game. But other than that, it can deal out massive amounts of damage. Next on this list is it's two Pokemon that I'm gonna group together. Both of these Pokemon can be obtained really early on. These two Pokemon are not similar at all, like Sock and Throw, but the role that I use them for is incredibly similar for these two. Their role for the Nuzlocke is to be a coverage Pokemon that can deal massive amounts of damage in situations that you don't really have the type advantage. Oh, I didn't say the Pokemon yet, did I? Okay, yeah, it's Stoutland and Haxorus. Stoutland over Haxorus because Stoutland is more guaranteed than an Axew. I would say Stoutland is more on the bulkier side because it has Intimidate, a bit more coverage, but then Haxorus just deals more absolute damage. But again, the role that they fill is incredibly similar. Now we have a defensive specialist in Gigalith. Gigalith is an extremely common encounter, or at least its pre-evolutions are. High defense, high HP, big attack, very reliable. It performs consistently. It's access to Stone Edge, Earthquake, even Explosion if you really want it. Again, this is a really transparent Pokemon. You get what you see. Next up is another defensive Pokemon in Kling Clang. Personal favorite of mine because it's so versatile. You can run it in so many different ways. Either like Clang for more defense, special attacker with Thunderbolt Flash Cannon, or a physical attacker with Wild Charge and Gear Grind. What allows you to be so versatile with a Kling Clang is its speed. It's for a Steel type, it's crazy fast with 90 speed. For a fast Steel type Pokemon that can be used in so many ways, I'd say it's honestly, most of the time, more useful than it's not. At the top of the bottom half of A tier is Chandelure. Chandelure is a great Pokemon. It just deals so much damage with a massive 145 special attack stat. It's incredibly useful in the Elite Four, doing well against Chantal, Caitlyn, Marshall. Honestly, other than that, it doesn't really do much for you, I guess for Bryson. But obviously it's a ghost type, so it's great for pivoting. But overall, just a really aggressive Pokemon, which fits my playstyle perfectly. Moving on, this would be the top half of A tier now. We have Seismitoad. I think Seismitoad is the definition of an underrated Pokemon. It doesn't really have the best stats, they're pretty much average across the board, but what makes Seismitoad A tier is its abilities. It gets access to either Water Absorb or Swift Swim, which are both really good abilities. Doubling your speed in the rain is always nice because you're basically just going to outspeed everything. Plus, if you're playing in the rain, you get a 50% water boost to your damage. On the other side, Water Absorb is also really good because now you can swap in your Seismitoad on a water move. Instead of taking a neutral hit, you actually just gain HP, which is incredible. It's the same case for like Maractus, though obviously not as useful since grass already resists water. Next, we have another water Pokemon, Caracosta this time, again with two incredible abilities. Caracosta is another one of those bulky rock Pokemon, so think low speed, high physical stats, low special stats, but its abilities make Caracosta insane. Solid Rock just straight up reduces your super effective damage taken by a fourth. Sturdy on a rock Pokemon isn't always useful, but on a Caracosta, it means that you're guaranteed to live a hit, so you can guaranteed get off a Shell Smash, which is insanely good. You can also pair it up with Curse if you think that you can tank multiple hits. I recently did a black trash lock where I got to use a Tortuga. I suspect that it would have probably been the best Pokemon in the game. Ah yes, next up we have the best defensive Pokemon in the game, Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn has a couple things going for it. Obviously, high defenses and attack, but it's also got a great typing. Most of its resistances comes from the Steel typing, obviously, but a lot of common like Steel weaknesses or types that Steel doesn't resist are covered by the Grass typing, so ground, water, and electric are now covered by grass. There's not many Pokemon in Unova that are good against grass types, so I think this is a very good trade-off. Ferrothorn also has a really good moveset to back it up. A Power Whip, a really strong physical grass move, Gyro Ball, a move that works especially well with Ferrothorn because it's already so slow. You can even pair it up with Curse to boost your attack and reduce your speed to really crank up its damage. Honestly, it outclasses any other defensive Pokemon on this list by like a pretty significant margin. Okay, so here I have a hot take. At least that's what I wrote on that Word doc. I think Archeops is like mid-high A tier. It obviously doesn't look great on paper because of its defeatist ability. It doesn't even have the best defense, which means that if it does get hit, it immediately becomes useless. The thing about Archeops though is that it's usually strong enough and fast enough to one-shot any Pokemon before it gets hit, there's really not many situations where it will be taken down into Defeatist. And if there is a Pokemon that can take your Archeops down into Defeatist, then why is your Archeops out? Duh. We're nearing the top of A tier. This is top 6 now, I believe. We have Samurott, our water starter. Samurott's an overall very solid Pokemon. Water types don't especially do well in the game, except maybe exactly against your rival. Having that water coverage and water bulk when you need it is like a good sense of relief. Samurott also has a pretty good move pool. Surf, Ice Beam, X-Scissor, Revenge, Aqua Tail. The one thing that makes Samurott broken though is that it gets access to Encore. Being able to manipulate what your opponent's gonna do on the next turn is always good. So that makes Samurott a really solid starting option. Right above Samurott is Jellicent. So I know I put all that praise on Samurott, but Jellicent is better. It's got more health, more special defense, it gets Recover, it gets Rain Dance, access to the Ghost typing, which makes it more usable in the Elite Four, and also half the time it gets Water Absorb, which I just described. Just think of it as a Ghost type Samurott that does slightly less damage, but much more defense. Here is this exception to the Psychic type. This is both the best Psychic type and the best Flying type Pokemon in this game, in Sigilyph. Sigilyph is probably what every Psychic and Flying type Pokemon want it to be. Fast and offensive. Because it fills the niche of both a Psychic Pokemon and a Flying type Pokemon, plus it gets good coverage, literally so many options. Ice Beam, Solar Beam, Energy Ball, Charge Beam, Shadow Ball, Flash Cannon. It learns so much. The fact that it has all this going for it makes it high A tier. Top 3 in A tier, starting with Scrafty. Scrafty is another Pokemon that I love using. It's really defensive, so despite being slow, it still can put in a lot of value. Its typing is crazy good for the Elite Four since it does well against 3 out of the 4. But the main kicker on Scrafty is that half the time, it gets Moxie, which boosts your attack for every kill. So as long as you can get 1 kill in, you're basically set to sweep. Next 2 Pokemon, these are top 2 in A tier. I'm gonna group these 2 together as well because I use them very similarly for their jobs. I've stated before that bug types are good in Unova, mainly because for the first time, there isn't a downside to being a bug Pokemon. But I didn't say the Pokemon either, but for Leavanny and Galvantula, these are the 2 Pokemon, they can come into any fight, outspeed the opponent, and just sweep. You're gonna be running Stab Thunderbolts, Bug Buzz on Galvantula, or you're running like Swords Dance, Leaf Blade with X-Scissor. These 2 Pokemon, they just deal so much damage so quickly that it's almost guaranteed that I use one of these bug Pokemons in my Gen 5 Nuzlocks. Galvantula has one more thing going for it. Half the time it gets Compound Eyes, which boosts your accuracy by 30%. If you slap on a wide lens on Galvantula, I think that you literally have a 100% accurate Thunder. Insanely powerful. That is all of A tier, and now we're moving on to S tier. So these are Pokemon that are definitely going to be on your team. Typing, move pool, they have a lot of good matchups against most of the game, probably single-handedly capable of like clearing a portion of the game. The worst in S tier, Darmanitan. Originally, I thought that Darmanitan was like B tier, but now that I think about it, I don't think there's a single Pokemon in this game without Sturdy that can withstand a hit from Darmanitan, obviously excluding like resistant types. Darmanitan gets Sheer Force, which boosts its damage by 33% in exchange for no secondary effect. You put this along with its massive 140 attack stat. If the Pokemon doesn't resist it, then I'm pretty sure it's just dead. Darmanitan's also really fast, so it can sweep a lot of battles in this game. Definitely underrated for sure. Next on this list, the best starter in this game, Emboar. Emboar is the best starter by far. Access to stab, fire, and fighting moves really early on in the game. Having access to fighting moves for Lenora, game changer. You can also get the Flame Charge Workup combination really early on, which makes, honestly, any fight trivial. It's also a really bulky Pokemon, so it's just nice to have on your team, just to have someone to pivot into. It's also got decent special attack stat. For some reason, it gets good special attacking moves like Flamethrower, Scald, Solar Beam. Emboar is just a solid coverage Pokemon that it provides so much value. Second best Pokemon in Unova, Excadrill. Excadrill is similar to Darmanitan in that it's a fast sweeper, it's able to dish out a lot of damage with the exception of not being super frail. Excadrill gets access to Swords Dance, so now it can actually kill things that do resist it. Plus it's just got a better move pool. X-Scissor, Shadow Claw, Earthquake, Iron Head. It's Darmanitan with a better typing, more defense, but it needs to set up, which is fine since Excadrill can actually take those hits. And now we're on to the best Pokemon in Unova, being Crocodile. Man, there's so much to say about Crocodile. It's another fast sweeper Pokemon, but this time you're Moxie sweeping, which is more consistent than Swords Dance sweeping. Rather than needing to set up a Swords Dance to kill the Pokemon in the back that need extra work, you just get the attack boost alongside the kills. So you don't need to waste a turn setting up. You only get Moxie half the time, but the other ability is Intimidate, arguably equally as good. Being able to come in, drop the attack, there are just so many options. It also gets access to a lot of utility moves, Taunt, Swagger. Oh my god, the Swagger Foul Play combination. To top things off, Crocodile does extremely well in the Elite Four. Not that the others don't, Crocodile just excels. You can cheese Chantal and Caitlyn by taunting and setting up. Crook is fast, it deals damage, it can cheese fights, it can sweep, it can pivot because Intimidate and its immunities. Crocodile is undoubtedly the best Pokemon to Nuzlocke with in Black and White. So here is what the tier list looks like. I think this is decently accurate. Obviously it cannot be perfect because everyone has their own opinions. Again, this is just based off of what I have played through. So if you do have your opinions, suggestions as to what makes a Pokemon good or worse, leave them down in the comments below because that's interesting to me. I would love to learn. But yeah, other than that, peace, goodbye. I don't have an outro.